well, welcome everyone. Thank you for sticking around to the non-physical solutions breakout. We'll start first by just recapping some of our housekeeping and community meeting guidelines. And actually, Drew, do you want to speak to these again? You did such a good job doing this earlier.
You got it. Ready.
Thank you. Oh, I got it. Okay. So just remember during the breakouts, please, if you're able to turn on your camera so people can see you as well. And just a reminder to, using one mic and one stack. So, if other people are speaking, wait your turn. And to please acknowledge everyone's voice and be considerate of everyone's time. And if you find that you speak frequently and often, consider stepping back. And if you're finding yourself not speaking up, please do speak up. And please always speak from your own experience and your own knowledge. And you're also welcome to use the raise hand function in the chat or drop the question in the chat so we can call on you. So, sorry. So for this breakout, we'll be focusing on the non-physical solutions. We'll talk about the non-physical solutions that we're currently exploring based off of the input that we've received and the technical analysis that we've been doing. And we'll also talk about how some of those solutions can be affected by some of the additional analysis that we're still going on, and also our next steps on this process. And what we want to hear from you all is, what are the solutions that you'd like to see prioritized? What types of solutions achieve the goals that you have? Any concerns that you have about solutions and what their implications could be, and also to share any other questions about the project and the outcomes of the project. So in terms of solution types, in this room, we're focused on the non-physical set of things, which include outreach, education, and capacity building, policy and governance, as well as service and program development. The other room is focused on the physical and nature-based solutions. And emergency response and preparedness is something that we'll be talking about at a future meeting. So as Carly mentioned, we're working through 3 different scenarios as different lenses to look at ways that different actions could be implemented. And in scenario 1, this focuses on those types of actions that are within the control of local municipalities, local governments, that can be implemented at that scale. Scenario 2 is looking at, what are ways of creating broader partnerships outside of municipal governments with private entities and institutional entities, but still sort of focused at that municipal scale of implementation. And then scenario 3 is looking at larger, more coordinated leadership at a regional scale and unlocking opportunities that are really only available at that larger scale of implementation. And as Carly mentioned, we are looking sort of across these scenarios to develop a preferred scenario that's like a combination of these actions. So you'll find sometimes that, these different scenarios are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but what we're looking to drive at is sort of, what is the appropriate scale to prioritize when looking at these different types of policy and governance and outreach and capacity building recommendations.
Mary, we need to switch translators. If we just pause for a moment.
Okay.
All right, we're all set. Thank you.
Great. So for each of these solution types that we'll be walking through, even across 3 scenarios, we really have the same overall goals for those solutions. But really within each of the scenarios, there's different ways that they could be implemented, depending on what is sort of the scale that they're being implemented at. And we want to hear from you, and what we hope you'll share is, do these actions sound right? Is there anything missing? And what should we prioritize? What is less important? And really kind of wanting to drive at, and that's where we're using the scenario planning exercise, is really, where should the responsibility for advancing these solutions, where should that lie, and why, to help us then in identifying an action plan that implements solutions at the right scale. So we'll go through all of these in more detail, and I'll pass it on, but just to introduce this, these are the 3 different overall solution categories that we're talking about here: outreach, education, and capacity building. And this includes things like leadership, capacity building within municipalities or different organizations, community awareness and preparedness, outreach to vulnerable populations, and also leveraging the expertise of local residents. Policy and governance, this covers different types of policies that include, standards for new development, for resilience, for green infrastructure, for stormwater management, how to deal with contaminated sites, as well as how entities governance entities are coordinating on infrastructure investments. And then within service and program development, we're talking more about different types of specific programs that could be developed around green infrastructure, around resilience hub, and also around waste reduction.
I think Deb has her hand up.
Hey there, Carly. How are you?
Hey.
Hey, I'm just trying to wrap my brain around this appropriately for the purposes of this exercise. So the first slide that pointed to the municipality and then the image, and yes. So at the municipal level, it would seem, just to clarify, that there would be, based on the slide that we just left, where you would partner with community stakeholders, NGOs. You had mentioned youth engagement, so potentially a school district or, various organizations. This all looks like a governance model to me, right? So municipal plus institutional plus private. I'm just wondering where residential populations come into play here. Which box?
All of them, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really about funding and financing, right? And also kind of how the coordination needs to take place. And so the idea is that anyone that could be affected at any level is being directly engaged through the process, but that you could, like, for example, the municipality can take action on their own property, right? Like in the right of way, for example, they could do green infrastructure without having to go through a lot of like extra legal easements, et cetera, to make it happen, but they still need to be engaging with those that could be affected by those decisions. So this is not an engagement piece. It's more like a coordination for implementation, but that's an excellent question. Did Mary or Drew, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to clarify further, when you talk about leadership training and capacity building, I was unclear about whether you were talking about that being targeting municipal officials. For example.
Yeah, we're going to get to that actually. Drew's going to get right into it and how this manifests across the three.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that the scenarios
Thank
are
you.
kind of big to wrap your head around, but I think as we start to get into it and you start to like see how this plays out throughout the different types of solution types, I think it'll be clear.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, that was actually a great transition to our outreach, education, and capacity building section. Because when we're this plan, one of the major goals is making sure it's rooted in community voice, and the residents within this region are the ones who are most impacted by climate change directly and have the solutions at their fingertips. They know what they need to see too. So that's what I can walk through this right now. Next slide. So our goals here, again, are to expand leadership capacity and coordination. We really want to improve that neighborhood level, grassroots leadership and resilience, and really make it a coordinated effort. We want to have residents becoming climate justice leaders and advocates here too, which will help increase community preparedness and awareness, and make sure folks just are aware of flood risk and resilience, and really can be there as advocates to promote flood preparedness too, which we know we already have a ton of people who are doing so too. But we can be better at it too. So that means we have to be better at our outreach to our most vulnerable populations, whether it's young people or our elders or folks living in public housing, for example, and limited English proficiency folks too. We really want to do everything we can to reach those folks too. And then lastly, we want to leverage resident expertise. As I said, like, residents are the experts. They know what they need to see for their community. And they have the answers at their fingerprint too. So as we're doing this, we're going to incorporate community science. We don't like to use the word citizen science because we know not everybody in our community is a citizen. But we want to have ways for residents to get directly involved too. Yeah, so next slide. So there we go. Number one, like going through the different responsibilities too. At the local level, one way to do this is invest in municipal level staff and have chief resilience officers. I think most of our communities already have a sustainability officer, but we really want to have that same like level responsible position for resiliency as well to really work on this too. But while we want the city to do this, our cities to do this, we also need to have community resilience leaders, have those climate justice ambassadors out there too, doing the outreach. So you could have, for example, a network of block captains or neighborhood association leaders, tenant association leaders that kind of come together and are trained properly and can be that real grassroots voice for change too. And then again, the coordinated leadership too. We need our state to provide guidance on the various tools and data and models that they have too. We need staff training on incorporating resilience into planning and policy too, which we'll talk about planning and policy in a little bit. And then we need a statewide program to continue these ongoing partnerships too. We can't, once the planning process is over, we need to have something institutionalized that will be there to implement this plan. Next slide. Again, increase community preparedness and awareness. The city should be doing a flood management 101 campaign to really educate its residents too and staff too, and then make sure that there's dedicated web page as well as other communication materials too for folks who don't have digital access to remain updated on ongoing resilience projects too. And then that flood management campaign too can also really ripple out to the community too, when you're working with different community groups as well as schools too, like places where there's already a lot of trust and people get information anyway. They're not getting it from the government, but they may get it from a community group or a school or even a church. And then going up the other direction too, we want to have regional distribution of that 101 campaign too. And Resilient New Jersey can help be that platform to engage on it too. So next slide. Improving outreach to vulnerable populations. Really have, again, those community climate justice ambassadors to do a lot of the outreach, to have people from various communities doing the outreach themselves. They know how to best reach their neighbors too. And we need our city governments to coordinate across departments. This resilience hits on everything, whether it's our housing authorities, our health departments, our economic and housing departments, planning departments, OEM, etc. We really need to have that happen too. And we need to make sure, again, on our shared goals that we're engaging deaf and non-English speaking community advocates to collaborate on needs, and like, again, senior advocates and youth, etc. We want to reach those that are most vulnerable too. So think very widely on how to define most vulnerable too. And then something that can happen at the regional level, which takes a little bit longer, but it will be massively important, is has some flexibility in the kind of larger contracts coming down from the state that make it easier to hire local translators, community groups, etc., to be part of this process too. And then I think there's one more goal. Leverage resident expertise. Boom. We need to have platforms that where residents can promote, can post flood reports too. And we also need to include 4311 reports too, so you can have some of the existing systems plugged into this public facing mapping software too. You can also have this on an app too, and coordinate. And then potentially there's community-based organizations or academic institutions that can help with that too. And then the state has their tools too, like their My Coast Reporter as well. So there's different things that we can use on this too. Let's make sure to do our best to integrate this all, etc. And is that the last one?
I think for outreach and engagement,
Yes,
yeah.
it
Any
is.
comments?
I see a
And-
couple
Mhm.
questions in the chat. Some long ones. Great. So there's folks who need to move to the physical solutions breakout. Yes, Sheila, you can move yourself, but also a facilitator can also help move you too. Tracy has a question about the zoning ordinance. That's perfect timing. That's the next thing we're going to talk about. Is actually Lindsay is going to jump in and talk about our city policies and governance structures too. But any last questions on these first 4 goals before we move over to Lindsay?
Does anybody have any feedback on what you think is the most important thing that you've heard, or, that you want to make sure absolutely happens?
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Tracy Tui. I'm actually the zoning officer with the city of Bayonne. How are you?
Oh, great. Nice to have you.
Thank you. So not only do I find this fascinating, but I think one of my comments and why I chose to jump into this room is because in Bayonne, one of the things that we took a closer look at is maximum lot coverage within our zoning ordinance. And the purpose of that was to increase the amount of pervious coverage. And to piggyback off of community outreach, or whether it's resident or so on and so forth, I think loving that idea, because for people to understand the why, I think is a huge component when it comes to either proposing, altering their property, developing new properties. So I think outreach to the community is key. I love that idea.
Yep, you're right. And thank you for what you're doing with zoning code in Bayonne.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I think we need to pause to switch translators.
Well, it may be an opportunity to move on to the next section, actually, while we're doing so. Lindsay, are you there?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. So just to reintroduce myself, I'm Lindsay Stickman from Jersey City's Division of City Planning. I'm going to talk about how policymaking related to climate resilience fits into the 3 scenarios. So local level, what requires additional coordination, and then the things that require a regional approach. So 6 goals have been identified so far, and keep in mind as I go through what's missing and what should be prioritized for the region. So the first goal is incorporate resilience in new development and construction, increase small scale infrastructure. Sorry, a window popped up. Increase small scale green infrastructure, integrate stormwater management and open space, incorporate resilience into contaminated sites, reduce risk from contaminated sites, and increase coordination on infrastructure investment. So I'll go into each of those action goals now. So starting with the first one, we could just progress to the next slide, please. Thank you. So goal 1 is incorporate resilience in new development and construction. So what falls under the local responsibility scenario with this one? One example is adopting the new state model ordinance for flood damage prevention. Some cities refer to flood maps from 2006, and we know that the baseline for flooding has shifted since then and will continue to do so. So that's one action that would be local responsibility. Another action is updating the stormwater management ordinance, and that sets requirements for stormwater management for private development, so it could be more restrictive. So that would require changing the language in a way that would require more projects to detain stormwater on site than previously. So that would be additional green infrastructure and other forms of on-site detention. For example, in Jersey City, we changed the definition of what constitutes a major development, and that definition is what triggers the requirement to detain stormwater on site. So lowering that threshold, we now have smaller sites that have to detain stormwater on site compared to the previous ordinance. For shared goals, many municipalities, especially in more urbanized areas with historic industrial uses, use redevelopment as a tool to repurpose sites that meet certain criteria to be designated as areas of needed redevelopment. And this tool allows for site-specific requirements that traditional zoning doesn't allow for. And this is a useful tool for enhancing resilience because standards that you see on this slide can be written into the plans that address flooding. So that's increased standards for green infrastructure, higher elevation standards, and egress standards, and design guidelines for maintaining active streetscapes. So again, it's pretty site-specific and allows some more flexibility in requirements. This next one, the flood overlay zone for green infrastructure, that would just be an additional requirement on top of whatever the underlying zoning or redevelopment is. We did that in Jersey City. So any application for development that lies in the floodplain, they have to do additional green infrastructure above the minimum requirement to, minimize localized flooding. Another one is through a stormwater utility. I think we're going to see that later on too. That kind of touches a lot of the scenarios. And retrofitting grants for private property owners and green infrastructure champions training program. I think that's another slide. So I'll get into that in just a moment. And then for regional coordination, identifying ways to increase standards beyond minimum state standards for flood hazard disclosure. Another one, long-term control plans. Our plans to address combined sewer overflows. So that last recommendation is to ensure that these large infrastructure projects identified to mitigate combined sewer overflows are designed with climate change in mind. We'll go to the next one. All right, so to get into more detail with what I was mentioning before, increasing small scale green infrastructure is another goal. So specifically referring to small scale green infrastructure incentives beyond the policies we just went over. One idea is small grants to assist private property owners to retrofit their properties. We just had the zoning officer from Bayonne just talk about lot coverage requirements. Sometimes over time, property owners could pave over the landscaping on their property for parking, things like that. So creating some sort of small grant to remove the pavement on their property and replace it with green space is an example of that. And to ensure that installations are sound and are maintained, training programs will help accomplish that goal. Then the next goal is integrating stormwater management in open space. So for those that may not be aware of the Green Acres program that's mentioned on this site, any park or open space owned by a municipality must be added to an inventory that is submitted to the state Green Acres program to ensure that these sites remain for recreation or conservation purposes and are not developed in a way that would preclude that. Also recognizing how our parks and open spaces are great opportunities for stormwater detention, having some guidelines from working with the state on some guidelines to allow for stormwater management would be necessary for this. Right now, the rules that govern these sites could pose some issues with future stormwater management on sites. So this goal is really about coordinating to ensure that these projects can be made possible. So site identification and further studies would be needed on the local level to develop this pipeline of sites. So again, local would be identifying the sites, Another, something that would require interagency coordination would be working with the Office of Emergency Management to support the funding of these projects and to also work with the state to create guidelines for these types of projects. So Green Acres goals are met, but also our climate resilience goals. And then the next goal is incorporate resilience into contaminated sites. So we can just go to that next slide. Thank you. So this would be more information on contaminated sites databases. There is a known contaminated site database that has, these contaminated sites range from gas stations to industrial, like historic industrial uses, and more serious contaminants like chromate, for example, that we see in urban areas. Coordination of state funding programs to accelerate the transformation of these sites is necessary, and further developing a pipeline of sites that can go through this process of transforming contaminated sites to function to address climate resilience would need that coordination as well. So that's what that goal is all about. And then related, reducing risk from contaminated sites, development of municipal or regional climate risk assessment and action plans for contaminated and remediated sites, or going to the next level and developing statewide climate risk assessment for contaminated and remediated sites. And then I think we have one more goal. And again, I know I just went through a lot, but it would really be useful feedback to understand what we're missing and if we're prioritizing things properly. So looking forward to that feedback. So the last goal is under policy and governance specifically is increasing coordination on infrastructure investments. This is a big one. This one also relates back to establishing a stormwater utility. And for those of you who may not be aware, sorry for not explaining what this was earlier. This was made possible by state enabling legislation passed a few years ago. So a stormwater utility is a funding mechanism to pay for a community stormwater management program. So much like a sewer utility bill, a stormwater utility would assess a fee based on the property owner's usage of the stormwater system. So how much stormwater a property generates. And that would be based on how much impervious or hard surface like rooftops or pavements is on a property. And then that revenue from that fee would support stormwater improvements like green infrastructure, for example, as well as planning and other programs that the community needs. So that would be enacted, it could be enacted on a local level, and you can see all the way to the right for coordinated leadership, perhaps a regional stormwater utility is appropriate here. So in addition to stormwater utility, creating standards for coordination between municipal and infrastructure entities. For example, cost sharing of infrastructure improvements between private developers and utility authorities, making that a formalized process. And on a higher level, on a broader level, the regional scale, creating an infrastructure coordination council. I think that would help with leveraging projects to address climate resilience. So for example, DOT, Department of Transportation, is redesigning a major road. How can we design it in a way that addresses flooding? And then I already mentioned the regional stormwater utility, maybe a regional approach is best. So I know that was a lot. So just looking for your thoughts on all of that regarding the policy and governance piece. Again, is anything missing, and what are some priorities that you all feel we should focus on? The chat.
It looks like Deborah has her hand up, and Ahmed.
The other person going to jump in, or should I jump in?
You can go first.
I guess we could. Oh, okay. Yeah, Deb, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just really curious. I would love it if there was an opening for Jersey City to consider a stormwater utility, or to make it easier if there was an authority regionally to have participation made less complex. The last time some of us heard was that the mayor was not in support of a stormwater utility. Has that changed?
Not sure at this time, but I think if, community groups voice their, support for stormwater utility, whether that's through this project or otherwise, I think there's always an opportunity to revisit that conversation.
That would be great. It's part of a document that was sent to me recently suggesting that the Green Infrastructure Task Force, and I'm not sure if, Arcadis is in touch with them or how all the dots are being connected, but it's really a partnership between the New Jersey Builders Association and New Jersey Future. And one of the things that they were focused on, in addition to the stormwater utility, was contaminated groundwater. And, there was an assessment, I guess it was a model project, and I'll send you that document. I have to fish it out. But they were basically trying to create districts in municipalities where contaminated groundwater would live. If you know that it is apparent on this parcel of land, it's likely in particular because of flooding, to travel over to the next parcel. So there was an oversight mechanism they were petitioning the DEP to do, but, it just seems to, have something to do with having this very informed database that potentially the state, and I think you mean the DEP by that reference, for contaminated sites specifically, and then potentially have a mechanism that's tied to working with developers who redevelop these sites to make it more cost effective for them and more informative to the public and to the municipality. So there were some of these mechanisms that were being discussed at the level of this, what they're calling Green Infrastructure Task Force, between the Builders Association and New Jersey Future. So potentially not to leave those folks out of the conversation.
Carly, is groundwater being incorporated into like this all hazards approach that we're moving into for the risk assessment? Carly is still here.
Yeah, that is. I just came off video just because it, not to be distracting while people were talking. But yeah, that's something that's being looked at, Deb, as part of the all hazards assessment that's beginning this month.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You guys got it going on.
It's actually you guys that got it going on and are, telling us what you want to see,
You're behind the scenes with your knitting needles. You are doing a really, really great job.
Yeah. All right.
Let's pause for a moment to switch translators.
Then we can go to Ahmed.
All right, we're all set. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, what's it called? I wanted to just the first one, scenario one, where it says track and publish development and construction activities in a publicly available place. I think that's a really good idea, because I've noticed a lot of people, even if there is a difference, that they I wouldn't say they fail to acknowledge it, but sometimes they forget how bad something used to be. And then they just, acknowledge the new and kind of forget how it used to be. So I think the idea of kind of putting, I don't know, the way I imagine is kind of like, not necessarily like a booth, but just somewhere publicly where you can kind of show like the before and after. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be development and construction. It could just be like, hey, look, this is how bad it used to be when it flooded in this exact area. And now, after we put this, practical implementation, here's the difference. I think that idea makes it kind of resonate a lot more efficiently for a lot of people and has them engage and kind of just push for more effort, if that makes sense.
This makes sense, because I think this was more getting at
Creo que es más cuando hay una solicitud para desarrollo.
but I like that, going a bit further and showing what the site was before and after development, whether that be a new building or a flood proofing. All right, were there any other questions? All right. I guess I'll pass it back over to Drew, right?
Hey, thank you, Lindsay. So we've talked about people. We just talked about policies. The other group is talking about projects. So the last thing we're going to talk about tonight, before we get into next steps, are programs too. So next slide. Again, so here, what are our different goals here? We want to increase that super small scale green infrastructure. Like, so residents, whether you're a tenant or a homeowner, or other, you can participate with green infrastructure and increase small scale installations too. Also, want to create resilience hubs, like we talked about the one that Newark has applied for Ann Street School. And these are like those really neighborhood or ward level spaces that people can go to for information, or places they can even shelter at if needed. And they can also have other benefits as well, like reducing urban heat island effect, or reducing flooding, of course, or mitigating greenhouse gas emissions too. And then lastly, waste reduction too. We want to find ways to reduce community wastes. That creates cleaner streets. It reduces impacts to our stormwater systems, and it means less trash going to our garbage incinerator that's here in Newark, the Covanta incinerator, that is a huge emitter of greenhouse gas emissions as well too. So lots of solutions there too. Next slide. Let's jump right into these. So with green infrastructure, one thing that we can do, and some municipalities are already doing it, or nonprofits are doing it, are distributing rain barrels and helping people install them too, either with a direct guide or physical assistance too. So, and then those can be used for so many different things too, like watering your gardens or watering a community garden, or washing your car, whatever it may be too. But it's a great way to save water resources as well. And again, it'd be great to have a real regional wide tree planting program. I know my neighborhood in Newark that I live in, we do not have enough trees, and on really hot days, it's not fun to walk around. So trees would also increase our permeous pavement, but it also reduce urban heat island effect and make it a lot cooler in our communities too. So that's another type of strategy too that we can do. And as we're going, feel free to raise your hand or type stack in the chat if you have a question or a comment on things that we might have missed too. Next slide. Again, that resilience hubs at city-owned properties or other city agency properties in the case of a school, or even at a housing authority complex too. There's community rooms that can serve that same purpose too. These can just be super, super effective too. I know folks after Ida or after Sandy, which was another major event that hit our region, community members told us that they didn't know where to go to get information right away. And so if you had these neighborhood level hubs that were identified ahead of time, we could it would have made things a lot more effective in helping people. You can also do them at nonprofit organizations or community groups too. There's so many different things that you can do there too. You can put solar on people's roofs, install green infrastructure. If there's a parking lot, maybe you can even have some gray infrastructure with some storage. Lots of things that you can do. It'd be great to have a network of these throughout our entire region too, which is boom, that's that scenario 3, coordinated leadership too, and have that resilience network that really comes together between them, where the different resilience hubs can share resources with each other on best practices and operations, etc. Maybe even the places of, when it's possible, there might even be like a microgrid of solar energy too. Next slide. That waste reduction again. So in Newark, and I know in other communities, they have these already, these municipal trash cleanup projects that happen, and catch basin programs too, where residents can adopt a catch basin, keep it clean, even work with local artists to beautify them with murals too. School groups can get involved, other community groups, etc. So great way to do it too. And again, scenario 2 is that municipal composting program, working with housing authorities, for example, and then do these trash cleanup days as well to really clean things up too. And then when you bring the hubs out there, when you do those trash cleanups, you're picking up the trash, you're bringing it to be composted, and what can be composted, and then community gardens can come and pick it up and use it for their soil and whatnot too. Yeah. And Jeff, do you have a question? Feel free to unmute yourself, sir.
Drew, this is Jeff Morgan. I live up in the North Ward of Newark. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, I can, sir.
Okay, so on a community basis, the Forest Hill Community Association has just recently refocused a very specific committee focused on air traffic from Newark and Teterboro, and are expanding it into an environmental action committee.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so thank you. We're very excited about it. We have a small group of people at present. Our goals are two-fold at this point. One is to expand the number of community members who will participate in some way. The other major goal is to partner with existing organizations. And I can tell you, in the few weeks since we formed the committee, the amount of information such as this program and the resiliency, as well as others, it's been overwhelming and very energizing.
That's great. I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah.
And I work for Ironbound Community Corporation, and we've been doing a lot of work for 50 years on environmental justice issues, and we've fought airplane noise as well in our community, but I'd love to connect. I put my email in the chat too.
Okay, great. And I will put mine in the chat as well when I'm finished. I'm actually sort of multitasking. I'm finishing up my workday, but I did want to comment on this. And if I could make two other quick comments. One is the catch basin initiative is something that we and a number of our neighbors do as we walk our dogs, as we do it, but we obviously want to expand that. The other organization that we've partnered a lot with, because here we're blessed with a community with trees, and many of them old growth trees. But we've worked specifically with the New Jersey Tree Foundation on tree plantings, which we are going to do again this year for the first time in a couple of years, due to their efforts in Camden and other areas throughout New Jersey, which we're fully supportive of, but also want to put more trees here. And the one thing I would take any amount of input from people that see my email addresses. We also have large trees here, and I completely understand, being near Branch Brook Park, the ability for these green spaces and trees to pick up excess water off of hardscapes and to work on improving the ability of open space and people's gardens and yards to pick up excess water and put it back in the ground.
Thank you.
So that's something I'd be interested in, is knowing other avenues. We'd like to look for grants or other organizations to partner with to bring in larger, more mature trees to replace some of the larger oaks that are leaving the community and are going to take many more years to grow to the same level of maturity that we have trees that were planted years ago. We'd like to start a program to.
The city of Newark just hired an arborist. So I'm sure if you reach out to me, I can help get you in touch with them to work on that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I'll take that and let you continue.
Yeah, we have one
you.
more slide to go, and then we're going to be wrapping up. So, but thank you so much, Jeff. Oh, do we have one more slide? Or oh, no, there's only 3. Oh, perfect. So 1 minute left. We have some next steps. Am I doing this last slide, Carly?
You're welcome to.
You do it. You can close out. No one's heard you this time.
Oh, okay. So next steps, we're going to be advancing these options and putting forward the draft risk assessment. We're also going to be publishing a video series that covers some of the topics that people have been letting us know that they really need to hear about. We'll be undertaking some youth engagement, and then we'll be doing some municipal level community meetings. And one of the things I just wanted to reflect on, Deb, in your comment, I think what you're seeing as successful here is really the results of like the passion and leadership that's coming from our steering committee members like Lindsay and Drew and our community advisory council, people like Ahmed, and then folks like yourself that are engaging actively in this project and really steering how it goes. So thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we'll drop in our email too, so that you can let us know anything else, any other comments that you have. You don't have to just limit your feedback to us during these meetings. We listen to it all. We listen to it, we take it in, and we integrate it. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Liz, I saw a comment about sewer separation. That was actually considered during the long-term control plan process, which we're re-looking at again as part of this plan too. But it was something that's been considered by every municipality had to.
Yeah, and if you want to, folks, you can join us again during the meeting at 6:30. You could join at around 7 and go to the other breakout if you want, because there's a whole hour on those physical solutions.
And we just have a quick post-meeting survey that we dropped into the chat. I'll copy it again so it's right there for you. And we'd appreciate hearing your feedback on how this meeting went.
If you have any questions, we'll hang out for a couple minutes too. We don't have to run right away. So us facilitators do have a quick break time before the 6:30 meeting. Thanks everyone for coming.
Carly, Drew, this is Jeff again. You guys ran a great meeting. It was well done. I enjoyed looking at the slides, and obviously you've done a lot of work.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks. I look forward to collaborating with you more in the future. Have a great evening.
You too. Have a wonderful evening.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye.